Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Lynch. It is my absolute privilege to serve as the Executive Director of ASA, and thank you for joining us this morning. This morning's webinar is focused on communications, and we are so fortunate to have Joe Donovan and Jerry Gallagher with the Donovan Group join us today. And of course, the Donovan Group is ASA's communication partner. So any ASA member can reach out to the Donovan Group, whether it's a crisis situation or just advice on general communications issues. And we cherish the relationship we have with the Donovan Group. And so Joe and Jerry will be here with us. We have it scheduled until 10:30. And there will be time for questions, plenty of time for questions at the end. But if you do have any questions along the way, I'll be keeping my eye on chat, and I'll alert Joe and Jerry once in a while for questions that we have as we go along. So I'll keep my eye on the chat. So feel free to add some if you have some burning ones, and I'll look for opportunities just to pause and get those questions. But we will have plenty of time at the end for questions. And so Joe and Jerry, thank you so much for being with us today. And Joe, I'll hand things over to you. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you, Jim, and hello everyone. And I'll just start by first of all thanking not only Jim for the introduction and Jenna, who's in the background running things, but for the invitation to be with you today to talk about a difficult topic. Before we go in, though, again, I just want to build on what Jim had mentioned before. We are so grateful to have been able to work with ASA over these many years, and so grateful for the opportunity to continue to do so. And Jim is right. The Donovan Group is always available for ASA members if you have questions. We're also going to provide some templates. So as we go along here, I'm going to be talking a little bit about that, some of the other services that we provide. But the bottom line is, if there is anything that we can help you with, if you just want to pick up the phone and give us a call and say, hey, you know what, we think that something may be happening here. Have you seen this before? Can you provide any help? Please know that we're just a phone call away. Truly 24/7, 365. Again, I'm so grateful for the work that you all do. And we're just very happy to be able to support you in your work. I'm joined by my colleague, again, Jerry Gallagher, who I'm going to introduce in a moment. And today, the title of our presentation, of course, is Communicating in a Time of Change. This is a presentation that Jerry and I have given a number of times to a number of groups out of state. And wow, do things continue to change? And we're living through what we often call turbulent times. And man, are they turbulent right now. The idea here, group, is that we're hoping to provide you with some high-level best practices, but also to give you some specific items that you can put into practice immediately should you need to. What you're not going to hear from us is you're not going to hear about spin. You're not going to hear about telling half-truths. You're not going to hear about how we can have, a short-term, win. What we're talking about is good, effective communications, building on the things that you're doing in an effort to do a really good job communicating, not only to your external audiences, of course, but also internally, which, as we all know, for leadership is so critically important. As Jim mentioned, we'll have plenty of time for questions at the end. We really encourage you to ask questions. And again, we'll leave contact information for ourselves as well. So with that, Jerry is going to take over in just a moment, and I'll let Jerry say a few things about himself when we get to his slide. But we're just so happy and proud to work with Jerry. Jerry joined our firm a few years ago. He hails from the great state of Iowa, and Jerry was a TV anchor and reporter both in Iowa and in Wisconsin. And Jerry is just an outstanding education communications professional. In addition to working in Iowa and Wisconsin, Jerry serves clients across the country. And we compare notes, of course, as colleagues, and so much of what we're seeing in Wisconsin, I primarily work in Wisconsin, we're seeing outside of Wisconsin as well. And so we hope that we can bring a perspective that focuses on Wisconsin, but addresses kind of emerging issues that we're seeing nationally as well. So again, I'll let Jerry say a few words about himself, but Jerry is the kind of guy that when he speaks, people just really focus and listen. And I've learned so much from him over the years, and I'm so very grateful. So with that, again, I think probably most people that are joining us today know about our firm. Again, the Donovan Group is a full service communications firm that focuses exclusively on public education. All we do is work with schools and school districts in public schools. We're truly committed, as I know all of you are, to help you as you do the good work of continuing to raise achievement for all students, including our most vulnerable students. And we say it all the time at the Donovan Group, and we'll probably mention it more than a few times during our presentation. What I think, and I bet what you also believe, is the greatest thing about public education is that when we say that we serve all students, we truly mean all students. And we meet students where they are, right? And again, that's something that we hold near and dear to our heart. We know that it's something that OSSA and you as educational leaders hold near and dear. And it's something that we're going to be talking about today. So again, we're a full service firm. We provide all kinds of services, and I'm so grateful for the opportunity to work with OSSA. Now with that, I will mention, we have our website at the bottom of the screen here. And some of you may recall that last year during COVID, when we were going through, again, similarly turbulent times, we provided literally hundreds of templates to schools and school districts for free. You just download them from our website, donovan-group.com. And we're doing that again this year. This is a list that continues to grow, but if you go to donovan-group.com, and you can either click on a link that says COVID-19 and you'll be taken to the template page, or if you want a direct link, it's donovan-group.com/coronavirus. In any case, you'll go to the templates. That continues to grow over time. We add to these every single day. And so we encourage you to check that out. Of course, we'll share our contact information at the end, and you can also just reach out to us as well. So with that, it is my great pleasure to introduce my colleague and friend, Jerry Gallagher, who will take it from here. Jerry?
Thank you, Joe. And, thanks, Joe, for the kind words. It's been a great pleasure and an honor to be able to work alongside Joe and learn from him over these years with the Donovan Group. And to Jim and Jenna, thank you for the opportunity this morning, and for all of the awesome members in the audience. Thanks for your continued hard work and diligence every single day to serve all students. So today, in talking about communication, we're going to do a couple of things here, not necessarily limited to this, but we will be discussing new and emerging best practices for public school and district communication. And what's interesting about this, well, there are multiple layers of interest here, but when I say discuss new and emerging best practices, there are some things that we will discuss that are real foundational pieces of communication that we found it's important to go back to. And so you can call that new and or emerging, but at the same time, they're tried and true. And at times it can get lost in the storm that we feel as if we might be in, but it's a good idea to be able to go back to things that have worked in the past. And we would call them those foundational pieces. We will also be discussing and reviewing scenarios to give you examples of what we have found to have worked with schools, and finally answer your questions. We do anticipate that you will have a number of those, and we're so anxious to talk to you, because communications is it's something like continuing education. It's professional development. I don't think you ever have perfect communications. It's about lifelong learning, and as communicators, we are always learning. And so I'm anxious to hear from you and some of the questions that not only we can address, but that also might improve our processes as well. Next slide. So what works and what doesn't? And some of these practices are things that we rest on every single day and have conversations about, and those vary from filling the vacuum, which is something I think that we have found is more important today than it ever has been. Communicating internally, making sure that you are in tune with your staff and what it is that they are thinking and feeling. Using video to show and tell. And this is definitely an emerging best practice that we have seen explode over the last 5 years. That video has become a way to really connect. And it doesn't take much to be able to use video to connect with your stakeholders. And we'll talk about that as well as we move forward this morning. And using surveys to engage. Surveys are really a tried and true practice, going back to what I said minutes ago. But it's something that we're able to utilize in a way to glean feedback, but also to connect with our stakeholders in a way that they may not have been reached in recent weeks, months, or years. Next slide. Filling the vacuum as a best practice. Wow, this has been, I think you cannot overstate how difficult the last couple of years have been. And so I don't need to tap into that any further than to just say it's important right now that we look at ways in which to fill the vacuum. I think this summer we really focused on how to fill the educational stratosphere with rays of sunshine. There was just a lot of tension. There was a lot of loud voices, and they might very well have been a vocal minority in our school district communities. And so we really discussed and looked at ways to be able to fill the vacuum with rays of sunshine. And those can be positive things that are happening, but also they can just be basic informational tools that we feel as if when somebody feels informed, that's a positive, and that can be a ray of sunshine. So how to communicate what instruction will look like and explaining what the school day will look like. These are things that I, as a communicator, know, and as a parent, I know we probably took for granted before COVID. It's a far different world today. And so how can we be intentional about communicating through the written word, possibly graphic elements, and what I mean by that, graphic design, and video? Are there social media? Are there ways that we can explain what that school day will look like for our students moving forward? And I think that we've worked really hard last summer to do that as schools were entering a challenging year, but this is a challenging year as well. And so to repeat some of those things and maybe to learn from practices last year that were successful in tweaking those, I think is very important as we move forward. Next slide. Communicating internally. This is, again, something that perhaps we took a little bit for granted in recent years, or I should say years ago, but in recent years, the premium has really been put on finding and doing a litmus test of where your staff is, and letting them know that they continue to move mountains and that there are brighter days ahead. And where I'm going with this is, I would imagine that you've heard every cliche in the book in the last 2 years about how educators have never faced the challenges that we do. I think we all know that. And so one thing that I really advocate for with my schools is finding a way to be creative, to be maybe new, digging deep down. And this takes some work. It takes some thought, but are there ways that we can communicate to our staff to let them know that they are valued, but not in a way that they've heard over and over again? And here are some real brief examples. I worked with a school administrator a couple of weeks ago on a very simple door hanger to design for her staff to be able to hang outside the door, either when they showed up in the morning or when they were done with a lesson and were headed for a break. And that door hanger included a menu of items that they could choose one or two things from. It might have been a favorite snack of theirs. It might have been, something that was a memento that the administrator knew was important to them. So it takes a little bit of an, but I can tell you that the response for that very simple item, a door hanger menu, I mean, as ridiculous as that sounds, that we have to be creating these kinds of things in 2021, but the response that generated is going to tie that administrator to her staff for this entire school year. And that will be remembered because it was different, it was creative, and it really served to remind the staff that they are valued in a time of turbulence, but also that your leaders know who you are and spend time getting to know you. And that builds trust. And we know how important trust is at a time like this. So that's one of those internal communications tools that I think is important. Another thing that I did just yesterday with a school district was create a mock press conference for new staff. And so we did a bunch of bells and whistles, and we did this in a podcast room that the school district had set up. And so they had microphones, and we had their school banner, and we had the lights and all the bells and whistles. And we interviewed new staff and had a lot of fun with it. But it was a way that this was internal communication for new staff to meet more veteran staff, and for everybody to kind of have a laugh with each other. So there are ways that we can communicate that don't always have to be, super informative, that they can be more lax. But at the same time, that shows that we're thinking out for your blood pressure, if anything else, and trying to find ways to reduce that and help to calm the waters. And having fun is one of those objectives that we try to reach for every once in a while. Clear about objectives and hopeful for the future, direct optimism. These are bullet points that I have listed there under moving mountains and brighter days in the clearing. And what I mean by direct optimism is that, and Joe spoke to this earlier about not spinning the message, but we know that better days are ahead. And we also we think we know how to get there. By doing the little things every day and not necessarily getting wound up or getting caught in, some of the vocal storm that's happening outside of our buildings. And so to remind our teachers and our staff that it is going to get better, but here's how we can do that, and relying upon the 3 Ps that we'll discuss here shortly is very important. Next slide. Communicating about the 3 Ps. And this is one of those areas that I want to tell you, I had no idea what this was all about when I was a journalist, because I spent 20 years on the other side. And when I say other side, I don't mean that there's a division here, but just trying to get information from schools and asking the question and establishing that transparent partnership professionally. And when I started working at the Donovan Group, one of the first things that I heard Joe was this safe harbor of communication during turbulence, and really resting upon the 3 Ps: process, policy, and procedure. And that when you get into a bind, and there are many examples that we could give when we feel as if communication is coming at us, that the response is not necessarily a winnable situation. And so whatever we say, if we meet emotion with emotion, most likely it might be short-term gain, but it's going to be long-term. And it's not going to be something that is going to help really build long-term trust between ourselves and our stakeholders. So it's important to rest on process, policy, and procedure. What are we doing? Bringing people into the room of process and opening up those doors and windows to show them this is how we make decisions. It may not be a decision that you always agree with, but we are going to bring you into that room and show you how it is that we make decisions that then lead to policy. So what are our policies that we can rest on that really help to guide the premise of serving all students every single day? And the procedure, how do we implement those? How do we enact those? How do we follow through on those processes and policies every single day? So, and I think Joe will probably touch on this a little bit more, but I can tell you that never before did I know what this meant. And the last 2 years, I have leaned into this time and time and time again, when we felt as if responding with communication that maybe from the instinctual level felt like we wanted to say something, we knew long-term that probably this was the best way to communicate when we were dealt or met with a tense situation. Next slide. Using video to show and tell. Video really can break through the noise in a great way, because what it does is it removes a curtain. I'm from a family of journalists. I have 4 brothers that at one time were all print journalists. They did a fantastic job. But one of the ways that we differ just a little bit, and believe me, I'm a big proponent of written communication, and we do it every single day. But I believe that video removes that kind of almost like a placid way of communicating, and shows in somebody. I mean, it's very obvious when you're looking at me right now. So you're seeing me, and you're seeing everything written on my face as I'm talking, which can be good or bad. And so one of the ways that we work with schools is to try to coach them about how to produce effective video communication, because we know that not every stakeholder reads. They just don't. And it's unfortunate, but those are kind of the current days in which we live. But our research has indicated, and I think that you could probably talk to anybody involved in communication, whether it be in school or industry, that stakeholders from 5 years old to 85 years old are watching video, and they're watching it through different platforms. But video is connecting. And at the most basic level, all you need is a cell phone. One of the things that I shared with the Donovan Group when I was hired years ago, because I brought a journalism perspective to the table, is that I was taught a long time ago that something as short as a single sentence or a 10 seconds of video can be construed as a story that can be interpreted as solid information. And so this doesn't have to be Oscar award winning material. Our stakeholders have, I think, a very wide stomach for unpolished, unvarnished communications at times. And so if there's a pep rally, there's something exciting, and you put an iPhone in front of you, and it might be shaky a little bit. Maybe the video is a little bit grainy, but you're taking people inside that room at that time. They are going to accept that. They're going to love it. There's going to be a mode of transparency and trust that they're going to connect with you because you took the time to do that. And so all we're trying to do with video is just get people in the room. It is so important in today's landscape to be able to counter what people are hearing outside about education with great things that are happening inside your classroom. And this is going back to that kind of tried and true and foundational piece of communication. We just need to find ways to be able to get people into your building, to be able to balance what it is they're hearing outside about 2 or 3 particular issues in education that really don't have anything to do with what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. That's fantastic. And so I can talk about this further a little bit later. I don't want to filibuster on this, but there are ways that we can schedule communication like this that makes it very intentional and not haphazard, to be able to break through the noise and to shower your community with positive things that are happening in your school. Next slide. Using surveys to engage. And again, this is something that we've been doing for such a long time, but it's very important to be able to ask and take the answers that you get, the feedback that you get, and going back to the 3 Ps, showing your stakeholders what it is that we took that data and we applied it, helped to shape our policies, helped to mold our procedures, and really giving people an opportunity to talk about what it is that you do and helping them to maybe be in that room again. And this is another way to do that in making decisions. And surveys are a great way to engage. I included an example down there, banning unified survey participation. This was a school district in California that we work with that just reopened last week. And they reached out to us a few months ago asking for a survey. And they really didn't, this is not something that they were well versed in. They didn't know how to do it. They didn't know how to communicate the survey once it was launched. But we created it for them. We had a series of questions about reopening, and it came back with, I think, 80% participation, and not a small community. And so what that told me and reminded me again is kind of this insatiable appetite that people have. They want to weigh in. They want to have their voice heard. Sometimes it's anonymously, sometimes it's not, but surveys are a great way to be able to reach our stakeholders in that manner. Next slide. Okay, I think at this point in time, I'm going to hand things back over to Joe and to review some of these scenarios. So I think we've laid some of these foundational pieces for you, and Joe's going to talk about what can happen when tension arises, and walk you through some of these scenarios. So Joe, take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. And so what I'd like to do now is I'd like to pick up on the points that we've been discussing, and I want to apply them to some specific scenarios. And as we've discussed, Jerry and I have been doing this work for a long time. And I think what you're hearing is we are constantly we're seeking good two-way communication, engagement. When we're talking about engagement, we're talking about two-way conversations. And over time, we know that good, effective engagement, is based on building trust. We're always looking to raise the level of dialogue. We can't lose track of that as we're doing this, to not meet emotion with emotion, as Jerry said. And again, to have dialogue about the promise of our public schools. And what that means is it means bringing people together. It sounds cliche. It may be, in these difficult times, it sounds silly, but we really do talk about bringing people together around their shared values. And again, to raise the level of dialogue to the degree that we can about our public schools. Again, what you're not hearing from us, you're not hearing us about doing PR spin or communicating half-truths. We have an obligation to protect students, as we all know. So that means that in some cases, a lot of cases, especially as it relates to students, for those of you who are in districts where people want to know who's wearing a mask or who's not wearing a mask or who's vaccinated or who's not vaccinated, of course we can't share that information. We never would. And we need to protect students and families. But we are looking to share as much as we can to bring people in. And so with that, we're going to look at some scenarios. We're going to talk about how we can put these things into practice. And I should mention that as I'm talking about this, we're going to talk about these three different types of districts. And we use these very general terms just for the sake of conversations, but we're going to address COVID. We're going to speak about COVID specifically, just because I think that it's easy for us to get our arms around, but we can apply what we're discussing to really any hot button issues. And my sense is that we may have some questions. There are a lot of hot button issues, including issues of equity, reckoning around race, and of course, the newest topic that we're starting to see more and more of, this issue of CRT, which again, we're hearing about. Some of you are seeing it very directly in your communities, others are hearing about it. The bottom line is that what we're discussing can be addressed in any of these categories. And so let's name these categories. Again, I'm going to go into more detail one by one. The first is the confused district. The second, excuse me, the second is the angry district. And the third is what we would call the on edge district. And so with that, let's start with the confused district. So a confused district is one in which board members, administrators, are hearing from staff, students, parents, and other community members, maybe that they don't know what's going on. This was a situation that we heard a lot of at the end of last year. And keep in mind that we are not blaming any schools or districts at all. There was so much turbulence, so much going on, so many changes that we were dealing with that, again, no one should be blamed. But we often hear that stakeholders in these districts say that they feel that maybe decisions are made in isolation, or maybe in some cases without the input of the community. Or in some cases, we're hearing that these decisions come suddenly from left field. Recently, I was working with a district that has a really robust engagement effort in place. They really do a terrific job. By the way, this is a district, the examples that I'm going to use are not Wisconsin districts. So I'm not going to name names, but just know that these are not Wisconsin districts. And in this particular district, their good engagement was something that they built over many years. And prior surveys in the district suggested that stakeholders were well informed and very happy with the district. In fact, many people in surveys said, we moved to this district because of the outstanding school district. But in this district, over the course of the pandemic, stakeholders, and here we're talking about parents and staff specifically, somewhat became disconnected from the district and the schools. And even though the district was communicating as they had before, the signal wasn't getting through the noise, and stakeholders began to express their confusion about the district and its COVID-19 mitigation efforts. So if you're in a district where you're hearing this, you're hearing that people are confused or they're expressing this level of confusion, the idea is, well, what can you do about it? Well, a couple of things, and I want to go back to what Jerry had just mentioned before. This is a good indication that you need to fill the vacuum. We've always heard that when we're going through turbulent times, if you're not informing community members, if you're not filling that vacuum, others will fill it for you. They'll tell you, they'll share information, and quite often it won't be true. It's your responsibility to fill the vacuum. And you can do that by anticipating questions, by explaining to the degree that you can what to expect. Now, in speaking with district leaders in the district that I'm describing, they had done a really good job of communicating early on in the pandemic. As their school buildings were closed and they were transitioning to different forms of education, but they kind of lost track of it, which was super easy to do, right? Because they were busy running schools and ensuring that students learn and were fed and all of the other things that you had to do. But they had not done, as Jerry suggested, fill the vacuum. Now, to their credit, district leaders had, again, not good reason to communicate. And when we spoke with some of the district leaders, they said, hey, listen, there are so many things that are changing so quickly in the community. And frankly, we feel like we're getting so much, abuse in the form of nasty phone calls and social media posts and emails that we just thought that for the time being, it was better to say nothing. Again, it's understandable, but the fact is that when you feel like you can't say anything, when you feel like there's so much turbulence that you don't know what to say, quite often that's a good indication that you do need to communicate, that you do need to move ahead. So even when you can't provide details, again, if there's a situation where we are starting to see the Delta variant continue to take off, if we have increasing concerns that we may have some may need to require some kind of change in the way that we're providing instruction, God forbid, we encourage you really to lean in to those 3 Ps. Again, policy, process, and procedure, just as Jerry mentioned. Now, again, we may not know exactly how school will look especially if we're in a situation where the Delta variant continues to take off. However, excuse me, we do know the parameters under which those decisions will be made. You can speak to policy that will dictate those decisions. You can explain the process. Now you can explain the process for how those decisions will be made, including the fact that board procedures are open and transparent. You can do those things now. So we might not know the outcome. We certainly can speak to the policy, process, and procedure that will dictate that outcome. We also can lean into our mission and vision, okay? And so as it relates to some of the issues related to equity that we may be feeling right now, people are coming at you. They're making accusations. They're making false accusations. In some cases, it's very difficult to respond to these items. But what we can say is that we are working in alignment with the district's mission and vision, and we are doing so with policy, process, and procedure. So we're seeking alignment. We're trying to stay above the fray and talking about what we are doing, again, leaning hard into that mission and vision. And that's exactly what the district in our example did. They created a mini campaign at the end of last year to fill the vacuum, to get ahead of the gossip and bad information. Their plan included a series of letters to stakeholders that were sent by email to every parent and every staff member in the district. Things in this particular district had gotten so bad that they needed to acknowledge that they had not communicated as well as they would have, maybe they should have. And they own that. They apologized. They said, oh, you know what? Listen, we're sorry that we didn't do this as well as we should have. Here's what we're going to do moving forward. They also leaned in the 3 Ps. And they explained while they did not know exactly what would unfold as we approach the end of the last school year, and by the way, they've continued to do this as they approach the beginning of this school year. And certainly we don't know what will happen as a result of this new variant. The district leaned into their policy, process, and procedure, and they said, this will frame our decision-making moving forward. And here's how you can stay tuned. And they really worked to be transparent. Now, this district also created a series of frequently asked questions that they posted, FAQs that were posted on social media. It was shared on, it was put on the website, shared on social media, and it was linked to from the letter that was shared. Excuse me, I have a little tickle in my throat, pardon me. Now, Jerry and I and our colleagues at the Donovan Group, we love FAQs. And if you've heard me speak before, group, you've heard me talk about FAQs. I love them because it allows us to anticipate the questions that we're going to get from our stakeholders. We can answer them as honestly and forthrightly as you can. Here's how I do this. I know, Jerry, you do the same. We encourage principals, superintendents, bring your team together, whether that's at the school level, at the district level, and brainstorm the questions. And this is pretty easy. Sometimes it's just a matter of opening up your computer and looking at your email and write down those questions. If you're getting the question, again and again, it's pretty likely a situation that more and more people are going to ask those questions. Write them down on a whiteboard or on a shared Google document, maybe. Take out the cursing, of course, but answer them in the same way that you're being asked. And then spend some time and answer them as honestly and forthrightly as you can. Beautiful thing with a website is you don't have to worry about, keeping it to 1 or 2 paragraphs. You can go into a great level of detail. Keep in mind, of course, that you're not writing a doctoral dissertation. You're not writing a master's thesis. You're writing to parents. By the way, when I do this, I write these, I have to, in my little mind, I always have to write this as if I was writing this to my wife, right? My wife and I are parents, or even to my mom, my 86-year-old mother, who, by the way, is an important stakeholder in her community, even though she hasn't had children in the district for a long time, right? And so sometimes it's helpful as you're doing these FAQs to consider who you're writing them to. But the bottom line is to be as open and forthright as you can be. By the way, I always use something that I call the gas station principle. Maybe you've heard me speak of this before. And sometimes when we're doing these FAQs, as I mentioned, they can be long. But consider what you would say if you were stopped at the gas station as you're filling up your tank by my wife, or maybe my mom, or maybe someone in your world who's just asking a question. And what you would say to them if you were standing next to your car as you're filling up the tank. How would you would answer the question? My sense is that you wouldn't go on for 1,000 words, but would be have a tighter response. The gas station comes in really well, so that we don't run into a situation where it looks like we're defending our dissertation. The bottom line is that FAQs during times of confusion really, really work, and I encourage you to use them. Next, the district that I mentioned did a fantastic series of explainer videos, right? These were little mini videos that were posted on various district-controlled social media account sites, in which they took one question and they addressed it on camera. And by the way, this was done, the production quality of these weren't great. They shot them, using their cell phones, right? And so the quality wasn't perfect, but it did the job. And most of all, it was really authentic. And so when Jerry says video cuts through, it really does. Video is a great tool. And so you can just simply ask the question and then answer it on video, post it to social media, post it to your website, and it works very well. The district that I'm referencing in my example, really did a good job, but it became clear as they were kind of going along that they were communicating maybe too narrowly. One of the things that we see as it relates to broadening our engagement is that quite often we tend to communicate with those who in our community demand the most of our time. It's the super engaged parents. It's the super engaged staff members who are critically important, because quite often those people are influencers. They carry your message to other people in their stakeholder group. And I'm not at all suggesting that you shouldn't communicate. Of course you need to communicate, but quite often we need to recognize that those people who are super engaged already have a lot of the background information. And there's a tendency then when we're responding just to that group that we're speaking over the heads of other stakeholders, maybe who don't have that same level of background. So we're always talking about broadening our communications efforts to include everyone. That's why I use the example of my mom. And that's why I use the example of, people in the community who may not be as well versed as parents. To do this well, we're looking to reach out beyond them so that we can share good, useful information. Ultimately, the example that we're using here did a really, really good job of catching up, getting ahead of the situation, and are now well prepared. And we wouldn't call them a confused district anymore. Things turned very, very quickly as a result of this good work, and they continue it. So that's the confused district. Let's talk about the angry district. And I will tell you, as we know, there are a lot of angry districts out there, okay? For us, an angry district is a district in which staff, students, and parents are just really upset about one thing or another, such as the district's COVID response, or maybe equity efforts. And we find that confused districts can become angry districts quickly, and that anger tends to increase, and the fire can ignite and spread quickly with negative media attention with talk radio or other outside influences, including with coordinated social media efforts. In another district, we found ourselves working they were working with a group of very angry parents after they voted. This was a district where they had voted to lift their mask mandate shortly before the end of the school year. And by the way, Jerry and I could tell you, there's no safe harbor. We are talking with districts that are, that have mask mandates as they go into the beginning of the school year. They're getting mean, nasty emails and phone calls. We have people who are not requiring masks. And I would say they're getting the same number of mean and nasty emails. The bottom line is that there are no safe harbor. But in this particular district, they had voted to lift their mask mandate. And for some, that created euphoria. People were thrilled. But for others, it really created a lot of anger. And in this community, they were also upset about saying that the school district was moving too quickly. It was a situation where a special board meeting was called to address this. And some members of the community contacted a TV station asking if things like open meeting laws were violated. And this is one of these situations, and group, if you're in this situation, sometimes it can almost feel like the anger, you can almost feel it, like it gets worse hour by hour. What started as a kind of a small issue at the beginning of the day is a roiling issue at the end of the day. Thankfully, that district turned a corner. They've made very good progress with their communications and engagement. And I want to talk with you about what they did. So first, this is a district that just really did a great job increasing their communication. Quite often, if you're in a district where there's a ton of anger, there's a tendency to just kind of want to not communicate. That's the wrong way to go. You have to communicate more. And in this community, they started by sending a letter to the district community explaining the why behind the move, okay? And the process that was used by the board to make this decision. Now, this is easier in some communities than others, depending on the board. I understand that boards sometimes, or maybe often, put schools and district leaders in a very difficult position. But if you can, explain the why behind the decision, and explain processes that are being used now to implement that. Second, this district acknowledged the stakeholders that they needed to do a better job of engaging them. And they committed, just like the other district that I was talking about, to increase transparency with the community. And toward this end, the district began sending communications via email as a wrap-up of school board meetings. They created a way for stakeholders to provide, comments to the board. And ultimately, we had good reason to believe that this enhanced transparency. The district also began to use a series of check-in surveys. Sometimes we call these dipstick surveys. These are just really simple little surveys. The district does them themselves. There are all kinds of free tools out there to do this. We do this, some other firms do this as well. Little surveys that are sent on key issues to the community looking for quick feedback. By the way, I just have to tell you, if you're doing these types of surveys, sometimes there's a reluctance to do this because you say, oh, people are just gonna go off on us. Here's the thing. If you're in a district and if you're seeing a lot of feedback, especially written comments, always provide an open response. If you're seeing a lot of feedback, that's a good thing. Even if they're mad at you, that's a good thing, because it suggests that people are engaged enough to share good information, okay? If people feel like you're not listening to you, we know that they're not gonna leave comment data. So in some ways, the amount of comment data, not necessarily what the comment data is, but that you're getting a lot of comment data is a good proxy for engagement. So don't feel terrible if you're getting a lot of comments, even if it's negative. I know that that's really hard. But the other thing is, as it relates to surveys, keep in mind that surveys are obviously a great data collecting tool, but they're also a great they're also a great communications device. Think of this. When you put together a survey and you're sending things to the community, in addition to having a little cover letter about how the data is going to be used and what the survey is about, it gives you the opportunity to provide some background. So typically you wouldn't just go out and say, hey, community, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? More than likely, you would provide good, thoughtful, neutral, research-based information explaining the why. Here's why the district is considering it. Here's the what, here's what we're considering. If you have different options, you can explain why the district is considering these different options. So where I'm going with this is that you can provide information. We don't want to be manipulative, of course, we would never do that. But we would do this in such a way that we can have a great communications device. Now, in this particular situation, the last thing the district did is they worked to make sure that board members and administrators were on the same page. So critically important as it relates to official responses. To the degree possible, group, avoid creating situations in which outside stakeholders try to pit board members against administrators. Try to have alignment. And a great way to do that is to share communications, and if possible, really work on them together. That's the angry district. Let's look at the on-edge school district. And there are a lot of them out there. In fact, I would say a high percentage of school districts in our state, maybe even in our country, might fall into one of these three categories. The last type of district is one in which people are on edge, and the feeling in many of these districts is that, you know, the piece that's normally part of the school district is gone. People are angry, there's hostile, and there's kind of this feeling that people could kind of blow up at any time, that you could go from being on edge to being an angry or confused district at any time. A school district, I'm just going to read this. One superintendent I spoke with a few weeks ago explained their on-edge school district in this way. I feel like everyone in the district is sick of the pandemic. They're tired of masks, but they're fearful of not having masks. And everyone, parents, students, and staff, just feel overwhelmed. Isn't that the truth? Don't we feel like that? Even at the beginning of this school year, as I talk with principals, superintendents, and board members, I just get this sense that we feel like we're exhausted. In some ways, even though we're trying to build ourselves up for the beginning of the school year, we feel that we're exhausted going into it. And certainly that's understandable. Again, we've spoken with a lot of districts that we would consider being on edge. So what do you do? Jerry and I, along with our other colleagues, have this analogy that we use, and we call it the kitchen fire analogy. And bear with me here. The fact is that small communications problems often seem to get magnified when districts are on edge. So when we say, when we speak to the kitchen fire, what we really mean is a small fire in the kitchen, as we know, can engulf the house, and it can do so quickly. So there's a need, right, of course, to put out the kitchen fire. Even if it's a small kitchen fire, take the time and put it out. In terms of communication and engagement, deal with your small communications issues now. Deal with your small communications issues now. Even if you're exhausted, even if as you're doing this other work, and I believe me when I say that I hate to burden you with this, but again, small issues turn into bigger ones, and you need to solve small problems. There are a few things that you can do to do this. You can, if you're in a community where some community members are upset about masks, or in some situations, maybe there's concern about some other issue. I just talked with a superintendent the other day who said people are very upset about a recently passed bond referendum. Talked with another district, and for a host of other issues, staff members are really concerned. Whatever it is, try to address those issues now, or at least acknowledge them. If your gut is telling you to act, and if you're being honest about it, then act. Try to get ahead of it. And if you can't get your mind around your communications challenge, one of the things you can do is an audit. We do audits, but it doesn't have to be, you don't have to bring in a firm like ours to do this. You can do this quickly, and you can do it yourself. Review your communications practices and your efforts. Maybe do a communications focused survey. Establish some communications goals and be honest, and ask yourselves, where are we falling short? What are we, who are we not addressing? What information are we not getting through? And then develop a little plan to address it. Now is the time to move. Truly, don't wait for things to get worse. Things will, as Jerry said, they will get better. Brighter days are coming. We know that, but we also have to be prepared for some turbulence. The key when we're talking about addressing issues, something that Jerry and I and our colleagues talk about is that when there's a need to react, but don't overreact. Jerry talked before about the emotional time that we're in. Don't meet emotion with emotion. Don't overreact to situations. Cast a wide communications net to try to get ahead of things like rumors and social media. Try to own your narrative. Try to fill the vacuum. If a phone call or a simple meeting will resolve the issue, don't do a media release. Okay, just do the small touch. Again, plan ahead, react, but no overreact. So with that, before we go to questions, Jim, I do want to share our contact information. And so here's the contact information for both Jerry and me, along with our phone numbers, our email addresses. You'll see here my mobile number, 414-418-0512. Truly, as you're having issues, please do not hesitate for a moment to pick up the phone and give me a call. We're so grateful for the opportunity to be able to work with OSSA. We're very happy to share, again, some of the things that we've learned different ways. So don't feel like it has to be a big crisis before you call. Of course, our emails are here as well. And we also have our company's website at the bottom, donovan-group.com. Here again, group is where you can find our COVID-19 templates and other resources. You'll see them on our website listed under COVID-19. So with that, Jim, I'll wrap things up on behalf of both myself and Jerry by just thanking you again for the opportunity to speak. And we are happy, we've left plenty of time, we hope, to take a lot of questions. So we'll turn things back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jerry. Greatly appreciate it. And folks, if you can just unmute and ask a question. And Joe, as people are queuing up their questions, can you give us, so again, last year you provided a wide variety of COVID templates. You've just updated those for this school year. Can you give some examples? Because sometimes we're referred to resources, but until we kind of know some more of what's there, then we say, okay, yeah, I'm going to definitely go and click that button and see what's there. Can you just give us a sense of what's new with the COVID communication templates?
Yeah, very happy to. What we've tried to do is we've tried to provide things like letters, staff letters, parent letters. In last year, we even had things like signage, right, that people could download and use, email templates, a whole host of different kind of written materials that could be used. And what we have heard from people who have used these resources is that in some cases, they're able to use them kind of as written. use them without attribution. You can use them as you like. In other situations, we'll hear and they'll say, hey, thank you. That was great. That allowed us to get started. We were able to customize it and provide some additional information. We didn't need some of the things that were included in there. So templates in terms of mainly letters at this point and those types of communications. But Jim, we also are continue to work toward having almost kind of a, maybe kind of a flow chart or having processes. So at the end of last year, again, as things were rapidly changing, we had created a situation kind of a, if this happens, here are a group of templates, almost kind of a series of menus. And what we found is that people really like that because it allowed them to kind of anticipate their communication needs for a whole bunch of different situations. So keep in mind that I wish I could say that Jerry and our other colleagues and myself anticipated the Delta variant. We're kind of in a situation where we had to kind of do a quick pivot and go back and make some changes. So more of these items are coming. So you can stay tuned. But that's typically how these items are used. And by all means, if we're missing something, please call, please email and say, hey, it would really be helpful if you had this type of communication. We'll work with our production folks and we'll get that done.
Thanks,
An example, Jim, of that is that we had a school ask us, can you provide a template or write a template for us based on our release of a health and safety plan, which is different than the return to learn, which is what we were knee deep in a year ago, because, a lot of schools, I work primarily in Iowa where we were face-to-face for the entire year. And so one of these requests was for, well, we're not putting together a return to learn plan this year, but what's different from this year as opposed to maybe 5 years ago is we do want to communicate a health and safety plan and let our stakeholders know these are the components of what we're doing every single day to ensure the health and safety and welfare of all of our students. And so that's one of those templates that is relatively new.
Thanks, Jerry. Questions? Go ahead and unmute and share your question with us.
Hi, this is Diane Johnson from the Tours School District. Thank you very much for this presentation. My question is, how do you decide when a small issue should be dealt with individually or on a larger scale with something like a frequently asked question or parent letter? So an example of that is we get a few calls weekly, principals and myself, with comments regarding inaccuracies of teaching critical race theory. Is that something that we would just individually talk with people about, or do you think it's a good idea to put something out with more of a frequently asked question?
Jerry, do you want to take the first part of that, and maybe I can pick up on the CRT part of that?
Sure. I think one of the things, Diane, that we try to look at when we consider what would be a kitchen fire that we can deal with maybe individually is if the issue is brand new or does it have legs elsewhere. And perhaps this is something that Joe's going to dive into right now, but where I went with that question that you had is that this is something that maybe it's the first time it's been brought up in your district, but we know that if your stakeholders are turning on the television or the radio, that they are hearing it. And so this is something I would recommend, and Joe, certainly push back on this, but I would recommend that is an issue that you would probably want to provide an FAQ with something broader too.
Yeah, I agree, Jerry. I think that's right on. I would say generally about any topic, if you see one or two, that's not maybe something that you need to necessarily worry too much about. This is really school and district specific, but if as you're seeing things kind of pick up steam, we talk a lot about in our shop about when we're dealing with a crisis situation about gas in the tank, right? So every crisis situation, every situation will say, there's a certain amount of gas in the tank. Now, is this a situation where if it's going to start taking off, that there's a lot of gas in the tank, or is this something that's going to burn out pretty quickly? I agree with Jerry wholeheartedly that on things like the big national issues, the things that are happening in neighboring districts, there's value, I think, also in just kind of being prepared for it. You know, if we're getting 2 emails today, maybe, you know, 3 tomorrow, and maybe 4 the next day, the concern is, hey, on Monday, are we going to get 50? With the next board meeting, are we going to have 100 people show up? There might be some value in starting to say, let's do some planning. Let's be ready for 50 emails tomorrow. And how would we respond? What would we do? And I think that's especially true with an issue that burns so bright, like what we're seeing with masks, COVID mitigation, CRT.
One more quick example, Diane, is we had a question from a school, maybe it was a year or 2 ago, about the content of a book in the library. Whereas we've seen situations like that become national stories or regional stories. That was one question from one parent. And so we felt like that was a kitchen fire. Let's deal with that individually because we haven't heard from it. I mean, yes, could this explode? Could it grow into something? But if you can deal with it,
Probably a good thing.
if you can deal with that individually right away, you might be able to prevent that from being a wildfire.
And Joe, Vince posted a question in chat. Do you have any FAQ samples regarding CRT?
We do not have any specific, well, I shouldn't say that. We have, if anyone is interested in that, Jim, they're certainly welcome to email me or reach out. We have some, what I might call some starter language on that. One of the challenges that we're seeing with CRT is that it's so school and district contextual in terms of schools and districts that it's a little bit difficult for us to create a series of templates that can be used kind of universally. So I do welcome people to reach out. I'm happy to share what we have. I will say, and just to kind of give you a sense of what you'd see and kind of building on what we'd said before, the challenge that we have with CRT is that for those, and we're seeing this all over, for those people who are stepping forward, quite often the playbook is school district or a school leader, you're doing CRT. And the district says, well, no, we're not. And they say, yes, you are. We know you are. There's nothing that you can do to tell us that you're not doing it, which creates a whole host of issues, and it's easy to spiral. There's value, I think, in going back to saying, here's what we are doing. What we are doing is we're committed to our mission and vision. We're committed to ensuring that we meet students, the needs of every single student of ours. We're committed to ensuring that we address things like systemic achievement gaps. This is the work that we do every single day, and we are committed to it. So in some ways, it's difficult to fight about things that you're not doing, and easier to talk about things that you are doing and have been doing, forever, including new efforts related to addressing the all means all. So again, happy to have, anyone who would like to talk more about that, certainly encourage them to reach out, and we can talk in more detail.
Thanks, Joe. Other questions? Well, Jerry and Joe, thanks for the time this morning. And again, when Joe and Jerry say, please reach out, they mean that. And it's a great resource. It's a resource of membership. So please take advantage of it. Joe and Jerry, thanks so much for taking the time this morning. We really appreciate it. And thank you all, and have a great Tuesday, everybody. And I hope to see you soon. Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone.